The only remnant of the murdered Congolese independence leader, Patrice Lumumba, a gold tooth, was returned to his family during a ceremony in Brussels on June 20, 2022. His assassination is a reminder of Belgium's brutal colonial history. The tooth was placed in a casket and flown to what is today the Democratic Republic of Congo, which celebrates Lumumba, who was murdered by separatists and Belgian mercenaries in 1961, as an anti-colonial hero. Shot dead by a firing squad, his body was then buried in a shallow grave, dug up, transported 200 kilometers, interred again, exhumed, hacked to pieces, and finally dissolved in acid. Gerard Sout, the commissioner of the Belgian police, claimed subsequently that he had taken the tooth and had overseen and participated in the destruction of the remains. He mentioned 2 of the corpse's fingers and a second tooth, but they have not been discovered. Sout's impulse to take the corpse pieces home as morbid souvenirs matched the actions of European colonial officials over the years who took remains as mementos. But it also functioned as the last act of degrading an adversary of Belgium. The teeth and fingers Sout grabbed were a form of hunting trophy, as he put it in a video he was in from 1999. The language suggests that for the Belgian policeman, Lumumba, who was revered across the continent as a leading voice of African liberation, was less than human. At 34 years old, Lumumba had attained the position of prime minister. He led the newly independent country's cabinet after being elected during the final days of colonial control. Belgian King Baudouin hailed the colonial government in June 1960 at the transfer of authority and referred to his ancestor Leopold II as the civilizer of the nation. When he ruled what was then known as the Congo Free State as his private property, there was no mention of the millions who perished or endured brutality during his tenure. Belgian efforts to deal with the fallout from its exploitation of Congo's rubber, ivory, and timber have just started. As many as 10 million people died from starvation and disease during the first 23 years of Belgium's rule from 1885, when King Leopold II ruled the Congo Free State as a personal fiefdom. Others were murdered, or deliberately maimed to encourage others to work harder to fulfill impossible quotas of lucrative resources. It is worth mentioning that in Belgium, the international protests against racism that followed the death of George Floyd in the U.S. gave new momentum to activists fighting to have monuments to King Leopold II removed. Lumumba was not so reticent. He stunned the Belgians. Never before had a black African dared to speak the way he did in front of Europeans. However, Lumumba was described as an illiterate thief in the Belgian press and was seen as having humiliated the king and other Belgian officials. Some have claimed that Lumumba signed his own death sentence with his statement, but his assassination the following year was also tied to Cold War maneuvers and a Belgian wish to keep power. Officials in the West were concerned that Lumumba would give the Soviet Union preference as a protector and grant Moscow access to vital strategic resources like uranium. Due of his adamant anti-colonialism and potential tilt toward the Soviet Union, the Americans also planned his murder. The CIA had drawn up plans to kill the 35-year-old politician, while a British official wrote a memo suggesting that killing him was an option. Nevertheless, there seemed to be a personal element to the way Lumumba was vilified and pursued. The total destruction of the body, as well as a way to get rid of the evidence, seems like an effort to obliterate Lumumba from memory. There would be no memorial, making it almost possible to deny that he existed at all. It was not enough just to bury him. But he is still remembered. Lumumba's son, Roland, said that the return of the tooth meant his family would be able to finish their mourning. Lumumba's journey from prime minister to victim of assassination took less than 7 months. Shortly after independence, the country was hit by a secessionist crisis as the mineral-rich southeastern Katanga province declared that it was splitting off from the rest of the country. In the political chaos that followed, Belgian troops were sent in on the grounds that they would protect Belgian nationals, but they also helped support the Katangan administration, which was seen as more sympathetic. Colonel Joseph Mobutu, the army chief of staff, seized power just over a week later. Lumumba was then placed under house arrest, escaped and rearrested in December 1960, before being held in the west of the country. His presence there was seen as a possible source of instability, and the Belgian government encouraged his transfer to Katanga. During the flight there on January 16, 1961, he was assaulted. He was also beaten on arrival as the Katangan leaders pondered what to do with him. Eventually, it was decided that he would face a firing squad, and on January 17, he was shot, along with 2 allies. This is when Police Commissioner Sote stepped in. Realizing that the bodies could be discovered, a decision was taken to make them disappear once and for all. Armed with saws, sulphuric acid, face masks, and whiskey, Sote then led a team to move, destroy, and dispose of the remains. It was a process that he was later to describe as traveling to the depths of hell. But it was not until nearly 40 years later, in 1999, that he publicly acknowledged that he was involved and that he still had a tooth in his possession. He said he had gotten rid of the other body parts he had taken. It is not known what Sote did with the tooth when it was in his possession. A photograph shows it in a padded box, but whether it was on display is not clear. But it did remain in his family. It resurfaced in 2016 when Sote's daughter, Godelieve, gave an interview to Belgian magazine Humour, published just before the 55th anniversary of Lumumba's killing. She said her father had kept a private archive and, though after his death in 2000, a lot was thrown away, she was able to save interesting things. The tooth was then seized by the Belgian police after a complaint was filed, and following a 4-year legal battle, a court ruled that it should be returned to the Lumumba family. With the return of the teeth, the former prime minister will have a final resting place in a special mausoleum in the capital, Kinshasa. Lumumba's murder and the brutal history of Belgian control of the Congo have been enduring sources of pain between the two countries. By returning the teeth, Belgium is hoping to draw a line under one of the most brutal and shameful episodes in the country's bloody exploitation of Central Africa. After 40 years, Belgian Prime Minister Alexander De Croo acknowledged that Belgium bears a moral responsibility over the murder of a man for his political convictions, his words, and his ideals. Belgium's King Philippe also expressed his deepest regrets for his country's abuses in its former African colony. Belgium has also made other attempts at honoring the leader's legacy, including naming a square in Brussels after Lumumba. The handover of the teeth will be another element in the process of reconciliation between Belgium and DR Congo over the colonial era and Lumumba's death. The burial of the tooth planned to coincide with the 62nd anniversary of Lumumba's famous Independence Day speech will offer an opportunity to revisit that past. Lumumba remains, for many in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a symbol of what the country could have become after it gained independence. Instead, it became mired in decades of dictatorship and conflict that drained its vast mineral riches. Thanks for watching. If you like this type of content, make sure you like the page and turn on the notification bell for more stories.